All right, good afternoon, everybody. We are going to get started. Another office hours. Some reminders before we start rolling. Remember, you have to connect to your computer's audio or telephone using the phone number provided in the registration response email, or simply use the link. All attendees are placed on mute for the duration of the webinar, just because you can ask questions, but we ask that you raise your hand, as we mentioned in the next stop point here. And we are asking that we are not monitoring the chat during the meeting. We love to hear from you, but we found that in the past, when the chat's going on quite a bit, it makes it difficult to pay attention to the presentation. So we're not monitoring the chat. Christy, I believe, has posted the PowerPoint into the chat already. That's ready to go. And then the link to the previous sessions are on the training page that is set here. Okay. So as a reminder, you all know these are the office hours that we host weekly, every Thursday from now until the end of the testing season. We're covering anything Smart or Balanced, NGSS or alternate, and sometimes we even have some bonus coverage on our other assessments. On the call today are my colleagues from the Performance Office. It's great to have everybody. My name is Abe Christ, but it's great to have all my colleagues. Christy Alberino, I know Jeff is on the call too. Deirdre Ducharme is on the call, and Janet Stuck. So thanks everybody for joining the call. As always, part of the awesome assessment team we have in the Performance Office. Also on the call is our partners at CAI, Jen Cho, Marie Musumeci, and Christine June. They're here to answer any sort of tricky technical questions that might come up, so it's great to have them as well. I know most of you probably know all this information, so I'm not going to spend too much time covering it. So again, about the office hours, every Thursday through June at 3 p.m. There will be no office hours next week just because of the school vacations. I know last year we conducted during the school vacation, and I don't know if we had anybody come, so we're just going to cancel it. So we'll cancel that meeting. All the team's invite was sent to all the district administrators, so everybody should have that, and feel free to forward it to any relevant staff. And remember, this is an optional offering, so you don't have to be here. As a reminder, all the previous trainings, it will be accumulating here on our training page, our student assessment training page. So last week's presentation is in a PDF and then a recorded version. That one went a little bit longer than expected just because we had a lot of information about CT SEDS and a lot of early testing reminders. But again, this link is here on the training page, and we've outlined it here as well in bold. So the presentation overview, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is what's coming in the next few minutes. So stay tuned. Some exciting new information, some reminders from last week, and so hold on to your hats. Here we go. So testing numbers as of yesterday, you can see that Smarter and NGSS are increasing. Also, our alternates are increasing. We did close the KELP window last week, and those 3,000 tests here represent subtests. So to get a general idea of the number of tests finished, complete tests finished, you'd divide that by 4, generally speaking. But again, we're going to see these numbers rise. Typically, the most popular time of testing is in early May, but we still get a lot of tests that come through now, and so we're up to over 10,000 completed for both Smarter and NGSS. Important reminders, again, all the relevant testing materials are on our comprehensive portal. TAMs and TCMs were delivered in late January. If you need any more, contact the Cambium Help Desk at 844-202-7583. And then just one reminder that it does, the testing window does finish on June 2nd. One thing that we did a little bit differently this year from past years is we have a test administrator training, a test administrator training here, where there's a link that is particularly targeted for test administrators, not necessarily district administrators. These are the important manuals that you might need or might have received. All the links are here. Again, this is something you might want to distribute to your staff, just because this knowing what's in these manuals is really the key to success. Oftentimes we say, well, what's the best way to get training on the administration of these tests? Quite frankly, if you're hanging on every word in these manuals, you're going to do pretty good. So be mindful of these manuals. A couple notes about results delivery, and this is a little bit more specific than what we had last week. Again, all the completed results will be done by mid-June. So you'll see those rolling in by mid-June for NGSS, Smarter, CTOS, and CTAA. We will be doing the rolling release in the centralized reporting system. We are now targeting May 12th for this release date. Again, it's dependent on some QC that we have to do, so I would say that's more of a soft date, but if everything goes well on May 12th, you will see results released for those tests that have been rolling through by that date. And then here's some links. I can't believe we're already talking about the end of testing, but if you're already thinking of that, because I know some of you are planners in the audience today, these brochures here are terrific ways to monitor test completion. And then one thing about PSIS, or a couple reminders about PSIS. Remember that PSIS, in PSIS, we had loaded these values as of November 2022. However, for the recently arrived students, EL students in Section 504, we did not pull those from PSIS, so those must be set in the registration module. That's important. Nothing's changed about these dot points from previous years or from previous trainings. And then keep in mind, we often get this question about what is really truth in terms of the demographic values. All changes to a student status will be made as of June 2nd. So that's really the day, that's our freeze date for our testing file. Then as far as which test is given, that's for the grade that the student is enrolled in PSIS. And then this is in particular importance, especially with the Sync to CT SEDS, is that accommodations are available only to students who are recorded in PSIS as special ed or 504. So if you're wondering, hey, why aren't these accommodations or supports not syncing, and you haven't set that indicator in the reg module, then it's not going to happen. So. And then a couple other reminders in terms of participation. Again, we're talking about students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 for testing for Smarter, NGSS, and SAT. It's still, and again, these policies haven't changed from previous years. We're testing students who are enrolled in the approved private special ed programs, our APSEPs, and we are testing students in PSIS who are being educated in out-of-state facilities, in-state facilities, and non-approved facilities. And if you have questions about that, the link is right here on a manual, a great brochure that Janet and Deirdre have created to attend to students who are out of state or in-state at non-approved facilities. Okay,
I'm sorry, I was going to just add, if you could go back one slide.
Yeah.
I've had several questions this week about testing new arrivals and new arrivals in English language arts. And do they actually have that waiver for the first year that they're in the country? And we don't have that. So even English learner, multilingual learners have to be tested, even if they're new arrivals, on the Smarter Balance assessments if they're in 3 through 8 and NGSS. We have I'm not sure if it's in this presentation, Deirdre, if it's at the end, the resources, yes, for ELML students, and Deirdre and Janet put together a beautiful brochure of every single designated support or any of the tools that they can use. There are also accommodations if they have an IEP or 504 plan, and students can get supports from simplified directions to direction to items and stimuli in another language. There's multiple languages. The directions are available. So there are things that we can do to make it a little easier for those students, but they're not counted toward accountability in the first year, but they are counted toward participation. Am I right there, Abe?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
what was
Deirdre
the question?
nodding her head yes.
In
There
terms
you
of
go.
accountability, yes, although there might be this idea that they have to be tested, but from an accountability standpoint, they're handled on the back end. So you're not necessarily counted for performance for the first year.
But for
And I would just
participation.
add, yeah, either they count as participants, but I would just add that if you have students that are unable to access the assessment because of the language print barrier, and even if our language supports do not meet the students' needs, if you can just provide students with an opportunity and see how things go. If they're unable to complete testing, that's at your discretion, but they should at least attempt the assessment. And if you have questions about the language supports or how you might handle a particular student, please let us know, and we'll work with you and see how we can best support your student.
So I'm going to turn it over to Christy. Christy, I think you were going to take these slides.
Yep, so the appeals, we've already have them rolling in. I know that it's been very confusing with CT SEDS and TIDE, but we have to be sure that all of the accommodations, all my appeals have been accommodation appeals at this point. Please have your teachers check the accommodations prior to starting a test. If you are doing this after the test happens, then even if the child has spent, done half of the test and spent 45 minutes in the test, that means that you have to submit an appeal to reset it. And those types of appeals, we are asking for accommodations. Can you go to the next slide, Abe? And the different types of appeals, for an accommodation issue, you would have to reset the test, which means they lose everything. If a student for any reason has a computer that shuts off, or they lose the internet, or whatever the issue is, you can reopen a test or a test segment in order to go back, if it's been submitted, or you put it in as a grace period extension, which is exactly the same thing. It's just not a reported test at that point. And the student can go back and look at the questions that they've answered before and change those responses if they need to, and they don't have to lose their work. A reset, we would erase everything and the student would start again from the beginning of the test. And we're going to only use invalidate for situations where there's a breach, a student is caught cheating or taking pictures of something, or if it's like, for example, a student who has an eligibility form in the system on the PPT recently now determines that the student's no longer eligible, we would invalidate that test, but really we don't use invalidation very, very much. Next slide, Abe. If you have an accommodations missing appeal and you need a reset, the DA should send a signed letter on district letterhead to the performance office. Please don't include the student's name. We can work it fine with the student's SASID. So you would put the appeal in the system, and then the letter is the same as it's been every year. You would provide the student's name and the student's grade and SASID and the name of the test and a description of the irregularity, and also the fact that the parents or guardians have been contacted. It's important that they know that they have options if a student has tested and they don't have their accommodations to which they're entitled based on their IEP or 504 plan, then the parent can opt to leave the test as is. The student does not have to retest, or you could reset the test and the student doesn't have to retest. Once the student has taken the test, the parent can determine that they don't have to be tested again due to a district error. And then thinking about some procedures that would ensure that this isn't repeated, since we're in the beginning of the testing window. And you can either email me that or you can fax it. As long as there's no name, you're welcome to email it. And Abe, we have a question about opting out. Do you want to hit that one? Is there a process for parents to opt out? And medical exemption, those are two questions that we have. And I have no other accommodations issues.
Yeah, I can, we were trying to stay away from the chat, but I'll certainly, Ms. Willis, I'll take this one for you. So there in Connecticut, there isn't a formal opt-out mechanism for students. From our perspective, it is state law, Connecticut General Statutes 10-14N, that all students are administered the test. If for some reason, and we understand this happens, I think you can fill in the blanks, for some reason a student is not tested, they will simply be counted as a non-participant, and there's the downstream effect. I know there's a little bit more to this story, so if you want to give me a call on some advice on how to handle that, I'd be happy to entertain that. But again, there is no formal ability to do that. And then in terms of the medical exemption, that's probably a presentation on its own, but I would recommend that you refer to the accommodations, the assessment guidelines that Deirdre and Janet have created. There's some great advice in that on how to approach that.
And Janet's actually going to cover the process for medical exemptions. So you will, part of your question will be answered later in this presentation. But what I'm going to do next is just share some reminders about the various ways you may need to address your test settings in TIDE. So given that some of our districts are fully implemented and on board with CT SEDS, while others are using a hybrid approach, and then perhaps other districts are not really doing much with CT SEDS at all at this point in time, there are different mechanisms for which you will enter and designate your supports for regular education students that are eligible for designated supports, for your English multilingual learners, and then of course your students with 504 and IEPs. So we've taken an excerpt from a table published in the assessment newsletter back in February, and it's also included, I believe, in the latest and greatest newsletter that's coming your way. But the next 3 slides gives the different scenarios for how to load your test settings depending on where your district is as far as where your IEPs live. So this particular slide walks you through the process if you're using an IEP vendor, or if you're using a file from IEP Direct, etc. So your options are to provide the batch upload into TIDE or to manually select those supports. And as Christy mentioned, we really want to minimize the kind of irregularities that may take place during testing. So if you can take some time to work with your teachers and case managers just to review the test settings prior to testing, that would be beneficial to all parties involved. And for students that need the embedded text-to-speech or speech-to-text accommodation, if they're not turned on in TIDE and the student begins testing, then those accommodations can't be provided on the same test that the student started. So as Christy mentioned, that will require a reset. So we really do want to minimize those kind of irregularities. So just note the next few slides. Abe, you can just kind of scroll through the next 2. This, again, provides guidance depending on whether you need to manually enter those supports or if your district is part of the CT SEDS sync. And then if you move on to the next slide, just as a reminder, we are in week 2, or we've completed week 2 of the sync between CT SEDS and TIDE. So for any of your implemented active IEP 504 plans, those accommodations are syncing nightly to TIDE. There have been a couple of hiccups, usually like at the local level, things get reported to us. So if you identify anomalies, or if you're concerned about something showing up in TIDE that isn't consistent with what you see in CT SEDS or whatnot, please let us know. I will mention that for our students that qualify for alternate assessments, if the PPT selected accommodations in CT SEDS for Smarter Balanced or Science, and then realize that their student qualifies for the alternate and selected that option in CT SEDS, you may find that accommodations are syncing into the TIDE system. So my recommendation is, if that's true ignore the accommodations that are listed in TIDE, assuming that your teacher submitted the ALT eligibility form through the data entry interface and that the ALT flag is turned on. When those two statements are true, then your student's going to have access to an alternate, and all accommodations are made available to that student, not only through the test delivery system, but also through the trained teacher administering the assessments. So if you notice anything kind of wonky in the TIDE system for kids taking the alternate, just disregard that issue. At the moment, we are working with PCG to resolve the code, the scripts that are running behind that sync, so that those accommodations don't sync in the future. As a reminder, the IEP is the source of truth. So if you're finding things set in TIDE maybe prior to the sync with CT-SEDS and those accommodations don't make sense, or they're not listed in an active finalized IEP, then you may need to go back and manually remove them from the TIDE system. At the minimum, it may require a conversation with your case manager to determine whether perhaps something was accidentally omitted during the PPT meeting, or if, again, something needs to be manually updated in TIDE so that it's consistent with our active IEPs. If you have difficulty turning something off in TIDE, then reach out to our office and we'll work with you and access your implemented active IEP to make sure any adjustments we make to your students' TIDE dashboard is consistent with their IEP. And I'm going to pass the baton to Janet. She's going to cover some remaining accommodation accessibility issues.
So this calendar should be familiar to you. This is what we've been posting since, I believe, October. This is how some features you need to be aware of in terms of getting your designated supports and accommodations, where they're entered, and those are in TIDE. Special documented accommodations, it's kind of a mixed bag, but we want to have you submit the petitions to Deidre and I. Typically, it would have been by March 1st. And these are also available in many cases within the CT-SEDS application. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other thing we want to make sure you're aware of is medical exemptions. If you have a student who is not available for instruction for the entire testing window due to a medical emergency, we have a process so that that student can be removed from any penalties of participation or scoring. So please be aware of these dates. That's initiated with a call to either Deidre or myself, and the directions for this are in the assessment guidelines. So we want to make sure that, as we've said a few times in this presentation, that it's critical because of what's been happening with CT-SEDS this year, and it's a transition, that it's important for your teachers to check the students' accommodations prior to testing. Then you're going to avoid appeals and make sure you get it right the first time. So in addition to that, because CT-SEDS is set up and we're still working through it, we want to make you aware that as you're having PPTs, make sure that you're selecting accommodations for your students. They're not in conflict with each other. So for example, text-to-speech would be in conflict with the non-embedded read aloud. So you'd have to pick one or the other in order for your teacher to know exactly what the student's entitled to and what should be provided on the day of testing. And that's true with the other accommodations listed here and designated supports. And these are those that we're seeing within CT-SEDS and also within our previous vendor systems. So you want to make sure that you look carefully and envision your child at the day of testing and what supports they need. Similarly, we have found that when individuals are working with CT-SEDS and they have options for special documented accommodations, these are non-standard accommodations that were provided in the past through the petition process. Some of them are now available on CT SEDS as long as you can attest to the fact that that child is receiving that accommodation during instruction, it's beneficial, and that you have evidence in the IEP that it's appropriate. So we're seeing that in some cases, these are not evident based on the content in the IEP. In addition to selecting these accommodations in CT SEDS, or when Deirdre and I approve an accommodation through the process of the petition, there are extra protocols, guidelines, and security and confidentiality forms that need to be attended to once that permission is given. So for example, the scribe protocol. Anyone who has been approved for administering a test to a student as a scribe must complete the scribe protocol. Those who are being processed with Deirdre and myself outside of CT SEDS would submit that scribe protocol back to us for review. If you have had that approved in CT SEDS, then your scribe protocol will be maintained locally. Similarly, you'll see in each of these accommodations, those things that are critical. I want to point out the math manipulatives brochure. It's critical that the student is tested individually, and this brochure describes the security procedures that must be in place when you're testing that student. The non-embedded calculator is a standard accommodation, and remember that it's only permitted for segment 1 of the Smarter Balanced Math Assessment and on the math performance test. And it's only permitted in grades 6 through 8. And if you have students who are using a specialized calculator, that's a little different. We often hear that districts are mixing these up. Specialized calculators are those that are specifically for students who are visually impaired, may have an audio component or a Braille component, and they would typically use it in instruction as well. So our alternate assessment system includes the KELP test for English language proficiency, which that window just closed, the alternate science assessment, and the alternate assessment for language arts and math. In order for a student to be approved to participate in the alternate assessment, they must submit, the trained teacher must submit the alternate assessment eligibility form into the data entry interface. And this is covered in the required training for that teacher. We also have secure alternate assessment materials that are to be used with the assessment itself, and the trained teacher should be accessing these either through the secure materials tab or their secure inbox. And they would use these as a script to provide the assessment in the appropriate grade and subject. We also have PDFs of the assessment itself that teachers can print out. And for example, if you have a student with an eye gaze board, you can cut the actual items and place them on the eye gaze board so the student can respond. Thanks, Abe. So one of the things that we have changed this year is the early stopping rule. And fortunately, the feedback we've been getting is that districts like it much better than our previous process. It's cleaner, it's faster, it's easier. So essentially, you will refer to the early stopping rule and student response check available on the portal. And teachers would have already administered what we call the student response check. And this determines if a student has the ability to demonstrate a response. And this is different than our previous assessment where they had to administer the first 4 items and then contact us. So this is like preloading, so that you already know at the time the testing window opens that that student will not be participating in that assessment because they will already count as an early stopping rule student. So this is essentially the process describing what the form is, and the district administrator would have submitted the attestation form saying that the teacher completed the required activities with the student and the student does not demonstrate an observable response. Abe, can you go back one? I'm sorry. So I wanted to remind you that it's important for you to communicate this to your teachers, not that they would request the early stopping rule now, but because if they have a student who was an early stopping rule student on the KELP, then they would not be able to access the test for CTAA or CTAS because that student, it's applicable across all the alternate assessment system. Thank you. These are some alternate assessment system training requirements and resources that we wanted to make available to you. And again, in order to administer the alternate assessment, the teacher must be trained. And this is an annual requirement because things change. This allows them to have an alt designation in their profile and allows them to submit the eligibility form and to access the required secure documents. So these manuals and checklists can help you access the test and understand what your expectations are. And the last two, the CTA and CTAS, assessing students who are blind, deaf, or deafblind, provide additional guidance to go with the manual, but to give you some insights into how to support that student. I think that's the last one, yes. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we will do our best.
And Janet, thank you. And Dee, thank you. I wanted, if you're mulling over a question, I wanted to just revisit an item that came up earlier, just so there was no confusion after reflecting on the chat. This is rewinding the tapes back to the discussion about students who might be identified, recently identified EL students. So those students, for accountability purposes, are not included in the achievement indicator for the first year. However,
you mean
that
recently arrived?
Recently arrived, yes. Did I say something else, Jenna? So sorry about that. So they're not included for achievement indicators for the first year. However, the data is collected because in the second year they're included in growth calculations, and then for the third year both growth and achievement are included for accountability purposes. So I just wanted to kind of, I think there was some back and forth about that, and yes, as Janet pointed out, that would be for recently arrived EL students. Sorry, that was an opportunity for you to ask questions and I'm providing more information. So going back to, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll happily help you out. Okay, any of my colleagues have any other words of wisdom before we close here for today? I don't know that we have any questions.
Feel free to call us.
Those are words to live by from Janet. Okay, well, thank you to my colleagues, both at CSD, CAI, and also for those of you in the districts that have attended. Again, we won't be hosting this next week simply because of vacation, but we look forward to the following week where we will be back and get gearing up for the remainder of the testing window. Thanks, everyone, and have a great holiday weekend.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you in a couple weeks.